On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alistair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and particularly today around the world. We've plenty coming up this afternoon. It's been almost 3 months since Russia invaded Ukraine. Today, I and my guests dare to dream. We want to know what will happen if Ukraine actually wins this war. Cash for tutoring in post-COVID schools, and are we getting back to the normal hustle and tussle of politics yet? I'll be speaking to great guests who are really in the know. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of today's news. Here is Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. Number 10 says the Prime Minister did not request a meeting with senior civil servant Sue Gray, and that he hasn't tried to influence the outcome of her investigation into Partygate in any way. Labour called on Boris Johnson to urgently explain what they discussed, with Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner saying people deserve to know the truth. 2 cabinet ministers have objected to imposing a windfall tax on oil and gas firms as a plan to tackle the cost of living crisis. Labour is calling for a one-off levy on firms profiting from globally high oil and gas prices, using the revenue to ease the burden of rising household bills. But the Health Secretary and the Northern Ireland Secretary say it won't work, and it could have long-term impacts on businesses. Greg Marsh, who's the chief executive of News, a company which helps families navigate the cost of living crisis, told GB News the government must do more.
Whether or not you levy a windfall tax doesn't actually affect the households who are currently feeling the pinch. That affects how the government pays for whatever additional measures that it might need to introduce. So again, we think the real debate is not whether you find the energy companies or whether you find the money under the pillows and at the Treasury. The real question is how you make sure that households who most need help get it.
The government could introduce a minimum staff requirement during rail strikes. It's as unions threaten major industrial action over pay. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps told the Sunday Telegraph ministers are considering making industrial action illegal unless a certain number of people are working. Political commentator Portia Berry-Kilby told GB News rail strikes aren't a sensible or compassionate move during the cost of living crisis.
By creating even more complications to people's commute to work, it might threaten other people's ability to earn money. It doesn't really seem the most sensible or even the most compassionate of decisions. Grant Shapps, by saying that there will not be kind of all power to the unions, is making a stand and saying that things have to change, and unions, all very well and good, can represent to some extent, but also can't kind of hold a gun to the government's head.
The Home Secretary will urge MPs to avoid mob rule and support the government's new public order bill tomorrow. Priti Patel will try to reintroduce measures which have been previously blocked by the House of Lords, including up to 6 months in prison for obstructing a major transport network. Ukraine has ruled out a ceasefire or concessions to Moscow as Russian forces intensify an offensive in the eastern region of Donbass. US President Joe Biden has signed a bill to provide £30 billion in military and economic and humanitarian aid to the country. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has cut off its gas supply to Finland after they refused Moscow's demands to pay in rubles. Ukraine's presidential advisor says Kyiv wouldn't accept any deal that involves giving up territory.
Any concession to the Russian Federation would instantly lead to an escalation of the war. So the war will not stop. It will just be put on pause for some time. After a while, with renewed intensity, the Russians will build up their weapons, manpower, and work on their mistakes. And they'll start a new offensive, even more bloody and large-scale.
Australia's Labour Party will form the country's new government from tomorrow, making a way for a greener way of living. Voters campaigning for climate change targeted seats held by Scott Morrison's Liberal Party, ending 9 years of Conservative coalition. Local media reports Labour, which hasn't been in power since 2013, is just short of a majority 76 seats and may need support of smaller independent parties. Here's what residents in Sydney had to say.
I actually think that it is time that we have a fresh government in place. The fact that the government hasn't made any steps forward on climate change, and they haven't been really active in that regard.
I thought that the Liberals were going to get in.
I think Morrison definitely needed to go, and it's good to see Albanese in. Yeah, lovely to see the independents. I think real change and a step forward for the environment.
And the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall are set to make a cameo in a TV soap. They'll guest star in a special episode of EastEnders to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Charles and Camilla will surprise the residents of Albert Square at a street party to celebrate Her Majesty's 70 years on the throne. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get to Alistair Stewart.
Bethany, thanks very much indeed. In the days following Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, many said it was a war that Ukraine could win, even against the might of a one-time superpower. Others took that as bravado, a morale-building rallying cry. Then Russia began to miss its objectives, not least Kyiv. Its army stalled, sanctions rained down on the country, its leaders and its wealthy elite, the oligarchs. Crucially, President Zelensky said, and I quote, "If, God forbid, Ukraine falls, next will be Moldova, Georgia, the Baltics, all of it, as far as Berlin." The aid accelerated, and the weaponry. Most of NATO doing all it could for this non-NATO member without crossing the line and provoking Russia even further. Now, in recent days, the NATO General Secretary, Jens Stoltenberg, has gone even further, saying Ukraine is now winning the war. And the former top US commander, retired General David Petraeus, declared Ukraine had won. Kyiv had been held. Kharkiv has been won back. The battle for the Donbass is bloody, ebbing and flowing. Only Mariupol, however, is an outright defeat for Ukraine. And that took time, and it cost Russia dear. Well, last night, President Zelensky said there's to be no surrender and that only diplomacy would bring a final end to this modern tragedy. And you've just heard one of his senior advisers in Bethany's News, Mr. Podolyak, saying Russia may be regrouping. It's not over yet. Well, today I want to put all of that in balance to explore with people in the know what victory might mean, what's already changed in Europe and the world since late February, and what would the world look like if Ukraine, despite those caveats, actually won and entered the history books as a middle-ranking nation that defeated Russia and its leader, Putin. You'll hear from a former top UK minister, a top journalist who used to cover the United Nations, a member of the Ukrainian youth delegation to the United Nations, who's also a member of the Youth Advisory Council to President Zelensky, and former UK ambassadors to Washington and to Moscow. But all of us also want to know what you think about it all. Email gbnews@gbnews.uk, tweet me or GB News, or go on Facebook. So, to get the conversation going, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined live in the studio by Sir David Lidington, CBE, former MP for Aylesbury, Minister of State for Europe, and sitting next to him, Mark Seddon, who is a former UN correspondent for Al Jazeera English TV, and here, former editor of Tribune magazine. We both know words, whether we're politicians or journalists. So my blunt first question to you, David, and then to Mark is this. Is it hyperbole? Are we building it up because it's what we want to happen? Or do you believe that Ukraine could actually win this war?
I think to some extent, Alistair, they have won in that the continued independence and identity of Ukraine as a nation, I think, has been achieved through the courage and, of the Ukrainian resistance.
Just stop you there for no more than 2 seconds, but that's profound, because you're a former senior top minister in the UK government, echoing almost word for word what General Petraeus, the top US commander for many years, has also said. They have, in effect, won.
They have won to that extent. And if you look at what Putin's forces have been doing in the occupied parts of eastern Ukraine, destroying books on Ukrainian history, trying to erase any symbols of Ukrainian statehood and identity, deporting huge numbers of Ukrainian people to prison camps in Russia. You can see the nature of the gravity of the threat that was facing the whole of Ukraine. So I think that they have stopped that happening. What I find more difficult to envisage, I hope I'm being too pessimistic, what I find more difficult is the thought that the Ukrainians would be able to push the Russians out of the whole of that Ukrainian territory that is currently occupied by Russian forces. Barring that is a major political shift within the Kremlin, when I think all sorts of possibilities become open.
Sure. Let me bring you in, because I said he's a top politician. I've known him for years, and he knows language and understands it. You and I are both journalists, so we really know language as well, and we know a headline when we see one, and we know newspapers and television stations that are going for something. What's your objective assessment of what we're seeing and hearing when you listen to people like David Lidington, but when you watch on television or listen to people in Ukraine? Can they win? Have they won?
Well, perhaps people were asking the same question in Vietnam all those years ago. So, yes, in many ways, they have won, most certainly in terms of winning public opinion across the world. There's no doubt about that, in my view. There's difference of opinion in many countries in the global south, but essentially they've won that huge battle. They won that battle about essentially being able to resist an aggression very, very quickly. But the war seems to have moved back to where it was and has been for the past 8 years. 14,000 people died before this latest invasion. So militarily, the Russians, it would seem, have been shown to be something of a paper tiger. They still remain a nuclear power, of course. But at the same time, the war has not been won, and it could drag on. And that is, I think that's very significant. And President Zelensky saying yesterday, diplomacy is key. Absolutely, it's key. At some stage, there's got to be a ceasefire. At some stage, there's going to be a peace agreement.
And but fascinating to listen to Mr. Podolyak, the advisor to Zelensky in Bethany's News there. I mean, he's more cautious than many of us are. And he's an advisor to Zelensky.
Yes.
Regroup. Russia regroups, tries again, bolts in to permanently keep the south coast centred around Mariupol and along to Crimea.
We can see they're already working to Russify those areas that they have occupied. Talk about, for example, some made-up referendum in Kherson to annex it to Russia. The Russians, don't let us forget, have a population that is much bigger than that of Ukraine. Each year they have a new set of conscripts who become available to them. So if you look at just sheer mass, Ukraine is at a disadvantage. What they have got on their side is courage, the sense that they're fighting for the survival of their homeland, their families, and now increasing supplies of very good quality weaponry from the West.
Yeah. It's also been a wake-up call to the United Nations. I can remember when you and I first started talking about a lot of this, and you're a former UN correspondent, you know how it works, and we were both saying, Sotto Grande, where is the UN? They're now in there on war crimes. They're now in there rescuing the very people that David was talking about, getting them to safety. This has been a phenomenal wake-up call to the UN, and it's responded reasonably positively.
Well, in terms of the agreement in Mariupol and getting civilians out, humanitarian corridors, yes. But no, I mean, I went on to work for the UN. I worked for the Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, and a good number of us were sufficiently concerned a month ago, there's well over 200 of us, former UN officials, to write to the current Secretary-General saying you need to be much more occupied politically and get there, because he hadn't even been there. And actually the political role of the UN has been pretty negligent. Well, of course, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but it's been extremely disappointing.
So you remain unimpressed?
Very, very unimpressed, frankly.
My peripheral vision spotted you going...
Well, yes, I agree with...
Yeah, no, I meant disagreeing with me, agreeing with him.
I think, yes. I think also, don't forget that when Secretary-General Guterres went to Kiev, the Russians demonstrated pretty much contempt for the Secretary-General's involvement because they bombarded an area of Kiev that was very close to where he had been staying. And he was visibly shaken in front of the cameras after that experience.
Yeah. I mean, he's also haunted by the fact that Russia remains a Perm 5 member of the United Nations Security Council.
Absolutely.
Russia's one of his 5 ultimate bosses.
But he doesn't have to be voted in a second time. He's already won. So he has got this great freedom in his second term.
Do you still think the UN will chuck Russia off the Security Council?
No, I don't. No, that's not going to happen. But I think that he, as a Secretary-General, has got enormous potential power if he decides to use it. His second term, he doesn't have to worry about offending anybody, frankly, and it hasn't been used. And so you are seeing power shifting more towards the General Assembly in the UN, which is interesting in itself. But for our purposes here, it's been, I think, a bit of a failure, frankly, and right now, there has to be some kind of ceasefire and peace deal and agreement. Russia and Ukraine between them, something like a quarter of the world's cereal supplies. I mean, it cannot go on and on like this. Otherwise, it does become like a grinding war. So this is when you do wonder about winning and losing and who are the real winners and losers.
Reminding folk at home that you, former Europe Minister for years and years and years.
6 years.
But parking the UN just for a moment, I don't think there's any debate at all that from late February to now, there have been profound changes within the European Union and there have been profound changes within NATO as a direct and almost exclusive result of what Russia did in Ukraine.
Yes, I think the centrality of NATO to Europe's security, the reinvigoration of NATO, the epoch-making decisions by Finland and Sweden to apply to join NATO, Germany's sort of switch of its defence posture, ditching a decades-long position.
I'm going to butt in just to, as you both know, a lot of people enjoy our conversations on radio rather than television. That's NATO-Finland press conference. So Finland and Sweden, vital changes.
Yeah, huge changes there. And also the White House, admittedly under a president who is more interested in Europe than his predecessor, switching some of its attention and resource away from the Indo-Pacific and actually realising European security is not something you can simply take for granted now. Now, the EU, I think, has done OK, but it's working better, more smoothly with NATO, I think, than at any time in my previous experience. As we go forward, whether we're looking at a victorious Ukraine or a stalemate of the kind Mark was describing, Ukraine is going to need the equivalent of the post-war Marshall Plan to help it rebuild and reconstruct the devastation of Ukrainian territory, the millions of displaced families within Ukraine are going to need to be provided for. And that is where we're going to need certainly the EU involved, because that sort of work would fall to EU rather than NATO responsibilities, working with Britain, working with the United States.
I'm going to bring in a third friend who you are both very familiar with, who was on the programme yesterday, Christopher Mayer, who I hope can join us down the line. Is Christopher there?
Hello, Alistair.
There he is. I'm in the studio, if you've been kind enough to listen to the first 4 or 5 minutes of the conversation with David Liddington and with Mark Seddon. Our conversation ended yesterday when I publicly said, well, you've got to come back to carry on the conversation today, when we were talking not about Liz Truss on the Marshall Plan, rebuilding Ukraine, as David Liddington was just talking about, but Liz Truss on arming up Moldova. And we've just heard on this programme Mr. Podolyak from the Zelensky private office saying Russia's not given up yet. Russia's regrouping, considering its options. That was exactly the warning that you ended on yesterday.
Well, I just don't think this is going to end anytime soon. And although it's quite interesting to have a discussion about what constitutes victory for Ukraine, and there's not much that your guests have said this morning, which I would disagree with, I think the most you can say is that morally, Ukraine is the victor already, because it has already disproved a whole number of heresies and stupidities which Putin and his clique have said about the country. But territorially, and to some extent militarily, you cannot say that Ukraine is the victor, nor can you say that Russia is the victor either. There is just a bloody war of attrition, which is starting to look a little bit like some of the episodes in the First World War, where artillery became more important than troops. And that is what we see today. Now, if we're going to start talking about diplomacy, that the thing can only be ended by diplomacy, absolutely true. I mean, what Zelensky said yesterday was a statement of the obvious. Only diplomacy can end this. But diplomacy itself must reflect something that's going on the battlefield. And it is only when Russia and Ukraine decide that the moment has come where they really need to resume talking that we may be on a path to a diplomatic settlement. That actually is an optimistic vision. A pessimistic vision is the Russians go home to some extent, lick their wounds, raise another bunch of conscripts, train them to basic standards, not very high, and the steamroller starts again. And I like to look at this in a historical setting, because you saw this time and time again in the First World War until the revolution of 1917, where the Russian army was beaten to pieces by the Germans and the Austrians, regrouped, raised another conscript army, sent them into battle, few early successes, smashed to pulp, until finally the whole thing fell apart in, as I said, in 17. So this we've got to prepare for the possibility that this could last almost a decade. And in that view, we have to take some very fundamental decisions. Can we NATO, as an alliance, deal with a Russia ruled by President Putin, or is his removal an indispensable requirement, an indispensable precondition for getting into talks? Now, what I don't know is whether we are actually in the chambers of NATO, in the halls of diplomacy. Are we talking about these things? Because
David Liddington,
although they may seem,
I'm just going to bring David in, Christopher, to comment on that.
I think we have to be clear that the removal of President Putin, whoever succeeds him, has to be a choice for the Russian people. I think that it would be a mistake for NATO to declare that as one of its own objectives. And I think that the time for talks is when the Ukrainian government is ready to engage in talks with a Russian government, led by whoever, that is willing to engage in those. So I differ very slightly, I think, from Christopher on some of that. I do think, and I agree strongly with him there, that there is no possibility of going back to any sort of normal relationship with President Putin. I think he has demonstrated his duplicity and his ruthlessness again and again during this conflict.
Did I misread your shaking of the head when Christopher was saying Putin has to go?
I think we really have to learn from past mistakes. I mean, to talk about regime changes, it really actually would strengthen Putin's hand, frankly. And I think we have to look beyond this. We have to look at a Russian military machine that has suffered a bloody nose, seemingly sensible people. I remember Sergei Lavrov at the United Nations, a seemingly sensible person turned into this kind of monster. But these people are very dangerous in a corner. And I think we have to look beyond this. You know, Russia may be a very different country. And actually, Sir Christopher just alluded to it, 1917, how quickly things can happen. So it's conceivable there could be change in Russia, but it has to come from the Russian people.
OK, final question. We could do this for hours, and I thoroughly enjoy it, and I hope it, most importantly, has helped people at home understand just what is at stake here. But the final question draws a line under that, and I'm going to start with Christopher, then come to Mark and David. The UK's position in the world, it strikes me, has also changed, whether it's our leadership role in terms of supporting the Ukrainians or relationships between the UK government and the European Union post-Brexit. NATO's always been OK. Has our position been enhanced and permanently in the world, Christopher?
Well, I think our position has certainly been enhanced because we've been seen to stand and to have stood, actually, for several years now, for some very important democratic principles, such as the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine. And if we can't stand up for something like that, what can we stand up for? So I think the fact that we've been very forward-leaning on this, firstly with the training of the Ukrainian army and then with the provision of hard weaponry and cash, has been an important point for the UK and will be a lasting accolade, if you like, for the role we've played in this terrible conflict. So I think it is a plus. I'm not particularly concerned about Brexit here. I mean, I actually don't think Brexit on this made a huge amount of difference. No. Totally.
I accept that. Christopher, I've got to draw a line because we're heading towards a break.
Presence.
If you don't behave, I'll book you again for next weekend. Always a pleasure to see you. To clarify, because I completely take his point about Brexit. I wasn't making it a Brexit-y point, but post-Brexit, much of the really grown-up political debate is about UK's role, its relationship with Europe, and its place in the world. So the same question to you. Are we enhanced and are we permanently enhanced?
Enhanced, and though on certain other policy matters I've been pretty critical of some things the present government have done on Ukraine, I think their calls have been absolutely right and strongly support the strategy that they have initiated. I think it has reminded European leaders in other countries that the UK, in or out of the EU, remains one of the core players in European defence and security policy. And that gives us an opportunity to rebuild relationships with other European countries that have become very bruised. We can argue about the reasons for that. Very bruised over the last few years.
And crucially, I remind folk at home who used to edit Tribune, a Labour magazine, one of great merit, in my humble opinion. It's also impacted on UK politics as far as Labour is concerned and its attitude towards NATO and its attitude towards defence. So in your view, with that background nod, UK's position enhanced and permanently?
Well, I think so. But I also think that the more important thing is actually the UN Charter, and we will enhance ourselves even further if we can show this consistency. We've shown, I think, great leadership over Ukraine. Glad to see it. But if I was to go back to the UN now, lots of people from the global south will be saying, well, good for you, Britain, but, you should also be clear that you made a mistake about Iraq. We want to see some consistency over the Palestinian territories, all of these sorts of things. Get that right, and then you can take some really strong moral leadership. Absolutely.
Oh, they might be listening to us even more. For the time being, I've already said thank you to Christopher. Mark Seddon, always a pleasure to see you. And David Liddington also, thank you both very much indeed for being here and for coming in and sharing some of your Sunday afternoon. I've asked you to come back at 1 o'clock, where we'll crunch a little bit more about the specifics of UK politics too. But for the time being, thank you both very much indeed. You are watching and listening to Alistair Stewart, and really rather excellent friends. But we've lots more still to come as well, including a tense wait until full-time this afternoon for the fans of the Premier League. Its title race, Champions League places, and the final relegation spots. All of that to be decided. Someone who knows better than me, Aidan McGee, will be here to explain it all to me, and through me, you as well, if you're not completely up with it. But first, something else you also want to know all about, the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy in the northwest with some rain, but drier and brighter elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. It will be cloudier towards northern coasts in the southwest, where patchy rain is possible. Elsewhere, it'll be mostly dry with warm, sunny spells. In the southeast of England, there's very little cloud and plenty of prolonged warm, sunny spells. Over into South Wales will be mostly cloudy in the west with some patchy rain. The best of the sunshine will be in the east. The northwest of England will have another cloudy afternoon. Some bright spells will develop, but with a scattering of heavy showers. In the northeast, it's a mostly cloudy afternoon, the cloud thick enough at times for some light rain or drizzle in places. It's a similar story in southern Scotland, cloudy for most, with patchy rain in the northwest and some heavy showers, mainly in the east. Northern Ireland will have a mixed bag of sunny spells and scattered showers this Sunday afternoon. The showers turning heavy at times, but many places remaining dry throughout. It'll be cloudy with outbreaks of rain in the north and northwest, drier with evening sunny spells and scattered showers elsewhere. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alistair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio, and thank you so much for doing so. There's a lot of pride and rather a lot of money at stake today in the world of football. In the Premier League, it's all come down to this, the last day of the season. Will Manchester City or Liverpool be crowned champions? Could former Liverpool player Stevie Gerrard, Aston Villa side, help his former club lift the trophy by beating their Manchester rivals, or will City reign supreme? I'm going to share a truth with you. I haven't got a clue. Aidan McGee has, and I'm thrilled to bits and much relieved that he's sitting next to me. But I do get the drama. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, it looks like a fait accompli that Manchester City are going to beat Aston Villa today at 4 o'clock. Listen, if you're Manchester City and you've got all the wherewithal they have and all the financial clout and the calibre and the experience of winning in the last 10 years, as serial winners, by the way, if you're offered Aston Villa at home on the last day of the season to determine your fate in terms of the Premier League title, you're going to take that. For the benefit of our radio viewers, we've got Raheem Sterling there training earlier this week with the rest of the Manchester City side. It could be 4 Premier League titles in 5 years for them today. Now, if they beat Aston Villa, that's it. Nothing Liverpool can do. Sure. Liverpool are also hosting West Midlands opponents. They're hosting Wolverhampton Wanderers. It's unfair to say, look, there's nothing riding on it for Villa or Wolves in this, even though they're part of this sort of pivotal narrative on the final day. A, they deserve credit for having done the hard work earlier in the season and staying up. Secondly, there is a Gerrard factor, as you mentioned just then. I mean, Steven Gerrard was unfulfilled as a Premier League Liverpool player. Don't get me wrong, he won plenty of honours. He was so close to win the Premier League in 2014. There was a famous slip against Chelsea when Demba Ba went through. Mourinho parked the bus. That defeat against Chelsea cost them, or saw them concede the title to Manchester City, as they look like doing today. But you have to wonder, Steven Gerrard, such a celebrated Liverpool player, could he cement his future as a Liverpool manager even? If he goes to Manchester City today and wins for Aston Villa. The other factor we have to consider as well is that each place, you mentioned money there in the league, okay? Each place in the Premier League is worth £3 million. So in theory, and yes, Villa still have to go to Manchester City and win today, and this won't be the story if indeed that happens, but they could climb from 14th to 10th place, Alistair.
And that's big beer
£12 million in prize money.
How terrified will certain clubs be at the other end of the scale?
Very much so. It's a huge drop in fees in terms of your the financial solidarity payments. However, the solidarity payments give you such an advantage next season if you go down to the Premier League. This is why when Norwich keep getting relegated and come back up again, Norwich and Fulham haven't played each other for 5 years. You know why? Because Norwich keep going up. When Norwich go up, Fulham come back down. When the team goes down into the Championship, with the benefit of all that, what Arsene Wenger once called 15 years ago financial doping, that extra cash in their pocket, they have such an advantage over clubs like mine, Queen's Park Rangers, who don't have the parachute money. And so invariably you're seeing the 1, 2 and 3 getting promoted from the Championship are usually the 3 that came down earlier in the season. But just to paraphrase what you said earlier on, what you said a moment ago, Burnley are hosting Newcastle. They have to better or match the result that Leeds get at Brentford just down the road here. If Leeds better the result of Burnley, they have to better the result, by the way, then they will stay in the Premier League. If they both get the same result, they remain on the same points, but Burnley's goal difference is 20 better off.
Are the bosses letting you go home and watch all of this, or have you got to hang around and tell us what it all means?
Listen, I'm a consummate professional and I'll hang around for whatever, for however long he means, but that's not to say I won't be watching it somewhere in the corner of the studio, that's for sure.
Great to talk to you.
You too, Alistair. Nice to see you.
Thanks very much indeed. Aidan McGee there. You're watching and listening to Alistair Stewart and Friends. Plenty more still to come this afternoon, including we'll be speaking to rural folk about the shortage of wheat in this week's Rural Spotlight. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 12:35. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. Number 10 says the Prime Minister did not request a meeting with senior civil servant Sue Gray and that he hasn't tried to influence the outcome of her Partygate investigation. Labour called on Boris Johnson to urgently explain what they'd discussed, with Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner saying people deserve to know the truth. The cost of living gap between rich and poor households has reached the highest since records began in 2006. The Resolution Foundation has found inflation for the poorest tenth has now hit 10.2%, compared with 8.7% for the richest. 2 cabinet ministers have objected to imposing a windfall tax on oil and gas firms as a plan to tackle the cost of living crisis. Labour says the tax revenue could be used to ease the burden of rising household bills, but the Health Secretary and Northern Ireland Secretary say it won't work and will have a long-term impact on businesses. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has told the Sunday Telegraph ministers are considering new laws to make industrial action illegal unless a certain number of staff are working. It's as the Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers Union threatens major strike action over pay. And more than 20,000 people have taken part in the Great Manchester Run today in memory of the city's arena terror attack 5 years on. Mayor Andy Burnham is among those paying tribute. 22 people were killed and hundreds injured when a bomb detonated at an Ariana Grande concert in May 2017. On TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We'll get back to Alistair in just a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 1 and you're watching and listening to Alistair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. Russia's invasion of Ukraine hasn't only been a huge military and diplomatic story, it's also rocked the world of food and energy. Ukraine's one of the world's big breadbaskets, as a huge producer of grain, much of it now locked in warehouses or, worse still, rotting in fields. And nations turning their backs on Russian gas and oil has had a huge impact too, not least on farming. So let's talk food with Andrew Ward, a farming champion and arable farmer of the year. He's known on Twitter as Wheat Daddy, therefore must be the perfect guest. Andrew, first and foremost, how do you assess, as a guy at the front line of farming, the impact on the world market for grain?
Yeah, good afternoon, Alistair. I think we are in a really very difficult and tricky situation at the moment. And when you start to look at Ukraine and Russia, the two countries there provide around 30% of the world's wheat. So those two figures alone are quite realistic, and you can see the problem we've got. But also we've got, since the invasion and maybe before that, we've got the increase in gas prices and also the fertiliser problem that's meant fertiliser has gone up 400%. So that, coupled with the Ukraine and Russia crisis, is having a massive effect on the production of grain all over the world.
It looks pretty tasty and healthy behind you, a good-looking field there. No, I'm serious. They're lovely, bright, because I know in my neck of the woods, rain's been a bit of a problem and it's not looking quite as good as that. But you can't accelerate a harvest. You can't turn around and say, grow quicker, we need you more urgently. What have farmers collectively been able to do by way of response in this crisis?
You're quite right. We can't do that because when we plant our crops of wheat, they're invariably planted in September and October, and they're not harvested until the following August. So it's a long growing season. And to help with that, we actually do have to rely on imports coming into the country. And usually we have French imports of wheat coming in July and August, which helps our plants keep running and helps fulfill our market requirements before our harvest gets started. And so usually we are importing wheat most years, but we can't speed up the process. And of course, we're not just growing grains on the farm. We have to have a balanced rotation. So my own farm here, we're growing beans, we're growing oats, we're growing sugar beet, milling wheat for making bread, and also feed wheat as well, and sugar beet. So we are growing lots of different crops as well. And we have to do this. Then, of course, we have government policy at the minute that wants to take more land out of production. And this is the big thing, and you've heard me mention this before, Alistair, that government policies are really hindering food production because they want us to take land out of production and put it into planting trees. And to my mind, we have to have a balance of everything. We have to be more self-sufficient. We are only 60% self-sufficient at the moment, and that is dropping at an alarming rate. But the government don't seem to understand or really want to do anything about that.
I was going to ask you that genuinely next, but you've given me a beautiful entree to it, because it just struck me when I was thinking about the conversation I was going to have with people like David Liddington, Christopher Mayer and Mark about the political diplomatic side of it, and I knew I was going to be talking to you and in a moment Nick from the NFU as well. I just wonder the degree to which that might change now, because the penny may have dropped with Boris Johnson, George Eustice and all politicians involved in this area, that suddenly something like Ukraine quite unexpectedly can crop up. And my God, we turn to people like you a bit urgently. Maybe they will have learned a lesson or two.
Well, you'd have thought they would have done, but they haven't, because they are still on this crusade to take land out of production, and they're actually paying farmers, paying us to do it, and they're actually saying that we are self-sufficient in our own grains, and that we are no need to worry the invasion of Ukraine will not affect our supply. But the problem we've got at the moment is that is right in some years, but of course every harvest, our harvest tonnage fluctuates, and in harvest 2021 we produced around 14 million tonnes of wheat in the UK, whereas normally we produce about 16 million. And our exports this year, since this last year, have been really, really small, only about 270,000 tonnes, whereas usually when we produce 16 million or 16.5 million tonnes of wheat, which is our normal production tonnage, we'll export in the region of 3.5 million tonnes and still remain self-sufficient. But the problem we've got is, I've mentioned fertiliser already, because the fertiliser prices are so high, we are now looking at, can we actually justify in putting the amount of fertiliser on the crops, and I'm talking about nitrogen here, that we need to make the crops perform and grow, can we actually put the right amount on to get the maximum return from these crops? And at the minute, it's looking very dubious as whether we can do that. And the problem we've got is that we've got 2 fertiliser production facilities in the UK. One is mothballed and one is running. And that is just ludicrous that the government are not helping to get this other factory going that is currently shut.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. One final quick question. I love chatting to farmers, and I've been chatting to one down in Hampshire not that long ago, and I hadn't realised about the futures market for grain, that you don't, obviously you don't sell it on the day when you've actually cultivated it, but you and people like you will be doing contracts as the year unfolds. So my tough question simply is this: what do prices look like in the medium and longer term?
You are absolutely spot on, Alistair, with the grains. And in my own case, I have sold grain at the minute that's gone out. It was sold 18 months ago. And of course, this next year, this is the problem we've got, is that people might look at the price of grain and say, right, it's £350 a tonne next year. But I've actually got grain going off the farm at £160 a tonne and £180 a tonne. And I'm not the only one. We sell a long, long way in front. We operate on a world market. We can't set the price. We are told what we are paid for our crops. And so you're quite right. A lot of these contracts, a lot of grain that's moving around and out of the country now, that it was signed by contracts probably 2 years ago. And you can't go back on those contracts.
Fascinating stuff. I wish you well, Andrew. Lovely to talk to you again. And thank you very much indeed for what you're doing. And you keep in touch. You're welcome on the programme anytime. Andrew Ward there, farming champion and arable farmer of the year, and perhaps you can understand why listening to him. I'm delighted now to be joined also by Nick von Westenholz. Nick is Director of Trade at the Great National Farmers Union, of which I always put my cards on the table. I am a member as well, but I'm entirely impartial in these matters, but I'm a member and a fan. Were you able to hear what Andrew was just saying then, Nick?
Yes, I did. Yes, I heard it.
Absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to nick 2 bits out of that before I ask you the other questions I wanted to ask you anyway. There was a bit of a clash in the House of Commons between the Prime Minister and Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Lib Dems, about farming policy. And George Eustice then went very public, saying, no, we're doing all of the right things. I mean, just listening to Andrew, it seems to me that there is more that the government could be doing, not by way of subsidy, this, that and the other, but recognising the core importance to this country of our farming community and our capacity to produce our own food.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely right. And it's something we've been saying for a long time, which is, you know, as the government designs a new agricultural policy, and it's had to do this because we left the EU and so we're no longer subject to the common agricultural policy. For us, at the heart of that had to be a way of supporting farmers, yes, to do environmental work, yes, to farm more sustainably, but crucially, to still be producing food. And it's not straightforward, but you need a policy that presses farmers to be food producers as well as guardians of the environment. And I think Andrew's concern, which he expressed so well there, is that it's leaning too far in one direction, and that farmers are being encouraged to produce what the government refers to as public goods, but not necessarily to produce food. And we would argue, well, a secure supply of food security, and domestic food production being an important part of that is a public good as well. So the key is to find ways to incentivize farmers and to assist farmers in producing food, but producing it in a sustainable and environmentally friendly way.
The expert on it, because you focus on trade at the NFU, but it seems to me, listening to what you said and what Andrew said before, we are heading to make exactly the same mistakes that the government are now trying to put right on energy policy, and that is throwing away the capacity of what they call energy security, i.e. producing our own gas, our own oil, our own wind farms and what have you. We're throwing away the possibility to have food security. Everything possible should be done to enhance our capacity to make our own food and feed our own people.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we're not arguing that every single morsel of food consumed in the UK should have been produced on UK shores. I mean, clearly there are some foods that we can't produce here anyway. And you need a diverse supply base to be really food secure. But at the moment, we only produce about 60% of what we eat here in the UK. And that is pretty low historically. At times, that figure has been over 80%, even in recent decades. So for us, that needs to be reversed. We need to have the capacity to produce more food. And it's interesting because these discussions, they seem to come around every 10, 15 years or so when there's a big crisis. And the awful events in Ukraine at the moment have catalyzed that. We go back 15 years or so to 2008, 2009. There were food price spikes then. There were riots, which happened because of that all around the world, North Africa most notably. And then you get a sort of a year or two of the government suddenly taking domestic food production very seriously. And then slowly they forget again, and we find ourselves where we are. So what we really need to do is to learn the long-term lessons of what's going on now. As I say, not take a policy approach that says everything we eat has to be produced on these shores, but take a policy approach that recognises farmers have a dual role. They look after the countryside and the environment, but they are food producers. First and foremost, that's what they do, and that's what they're proud to do.
I agree with that completely, first and foremost being the crucial part of it. The final question, Nick, and as I said to Andrew, I genuinely love chatting to farmers and people who we have a little holding mainly for equestrian sport, but therefore we need people who fertilise and cut and bale hay and all the rest of it. And we were having a chat the other day, and my wife came back absolutely furious about it, and it was about rapeseed oil because of the shortage of Ukrainian oils coming in. And she said that she'd been told by a farmer who was up for producing lots of rapeseed because it produced oils, that we were importing stuff from Australia that was cheaper but used certain treatments to enhance the crop that we were not allowed to use here in this country, so we were cutting off our nose to spite our face in terms of rapeseed oil. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. We banned a class of insecticides here in the UK some years ago to be used on oilseed rape. So they're no longer used on oilseed rape, which has actually meant there has been a quite considerable reduction in the amount of oilseed rape grown in the UK. But that is a UK law, essentially, that applies only to UK producers. So if producers overseas, like, for example, in Australia, have used those insecticides, which they're allowed to use over there, and the residues on them have to be below a certain level when they're imported, but there's nothing to stop them using those insecticides, then that's fine. We can import that oilseed rape, and indeed we do. And it's a great point, because it's an example of where UK policy is asking us on the one hand to compete with farmers all over the world who have access to technologies and to different standards than we do here. And yet we're not being given the domestic policy support to do so. So it's a good example.
Great talking to you and Andrew before you, Nick. There's a good agenda there for a chat with George Eustace, who's a nice guy, and I like him a lot, so we'll try and get him on the programme and run through some of those points. But for the time being, Nick von Westenholz, Director of Trade at the National Farmers Union, my thanks. Keep in touch. Thank you very much indeed. Great stuff there. I'm tempted to say food for thought, but that's probably too dreadful a pun, so I won't say it. Now, another passion of mine is Formula One. Not quite so much this season as last season, but there you go. That said, the Ferrari driver, hurrah! Charles Leclerc has qualified in pole position for this year's Spanish Grand Prix, followed by one Max Verstappen. But car upgrades have helped Hamilton's teammate George Russell to Mercedes' best qualifying position of the season with fourth. But Lewis himself has admitted that he is still struggling to get the best out of the car, and he will start today's race in sixth behind Red Bull's Checo. Joining us now, as always, is our good friend Philip Duncan, Formula One correspondent for PA Sport. Before we come to any of that we've got time for, I'm sensing that the drivers seem to feel that this is almost a proper Grand Prix after the razzmatazz of Miami.
Yeah, I think you're right with that, Alistair. We're back to traditional heartland in Europe, in Spain. It's absolutely sweltering over here, something like 35, 36 degrees. I really should have packed my sombrero, to be honest. A bit of regret that I haven't, but yeah, back to the drivers. It's a race that's been on the calendar for a long while. There's 100,000 people, more than 100,000 people here today. It was pretty tricky getting in. Lots of cars, lots of fans to watch the action. So yeah, back in Europe after the razzmatazz of the US, and hopefully we'll have a good race.
When you were last on, we were talking about, I'm genuinely pleased that Ferrari were doing well, as people watching on television, but not those listening on radio, just saw a beautiful Ferrari do a bit of a donut. But there we are, we forgive them. Leclerc recovered from that and went on. What worries me as a Hamilton fan and a Mercedes fan is that there was a lot of talk about upgrades, and maybe this was the breakthrough race to get Lewis back in with a bit of a chance. Not there, not happening. Great for George Russell, but Lewis is not happening this year.
No, I think the grim reality is, Alistair, that Mercedes have brought upgrades here. They have had an impact. So they are closer to the front, but George Russell, even though he's improved, he's still 6/10 back, which, as you know, in Formula One is a long way. And Hamilton even further back, starts sixth on the grid, and he was a 10th slower than his teammate. And we spoke to him last night, and although he was optimistic and pleased that his car is in a better position than it has been in recent times, I think he was a little bit bewildered as to why he's not being able to find the best out of this package in the way that Russell has. As we know, Hamilton's the greatest driver Formula One's ever seen in terms of the statistics, but he's really struggling to get on top of this Mercedes this year, even though it's improved. So I think it's a really crucial race for him today, because Russell's finished ahead of him at 4 of the 5 Grand Prix that we've had, and although Russell's been fortunate at a couple of those with the safety car to get ahead of Hamilton, I think this is a race that Hamilton really needs to probably try and raise his game, up his game, and to get back ahead of his teammate and back ahead of Russell, because although he's obviously the greatest that we've seen, it will start to play on his mind a little bit if his teammate's quicker, and yeah, as I said, an important race for him to change that, really.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. I hope you enjoy it. As I always say, and I genuinely mean it, I know it's the busiest day for you, but thanks for finding a little bit of time for us before the race to explain what's really going on at the Spanish Grand Prix. Absolutely terrific, Philip. Thank you very much indeed. You are watching and listening to Alistair Stewart and Friends. We've more to come on the programme this afternoon, including our conversation on Ukraine. Is it possible that they can win the war? And if so, what does that really mean? But first, let's take a quick look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy in the northwest with some rain, but drier and brighter elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. It will tend to be cloudier towards northern coasts in the southwest, where a little patchy rain is possible. In the southeast of England, there is very little cloud and plenty of prolonged warm sunny spells here. South Wales will be mostly cloudy in the west, with some patchy rain here. The best of the sunshine will be in the east. The northwest of England has another rather cloudy afternoon, although some bright or sunny spells will develop, along with a scattering of locally heavy showers. In the northeast, it's mostly cloudy this Sunday afternoon. The cloud thick enough at times for a light rain or drizzle in places. It's a similar story in southern Scotland, cloudy for most, with patchy rain in the northwest and some heavy showers, mainly in the east of the country. In contrast, Northern Ireland will have a mixed bag of sunny spells and scattered showers this afternoon. The showers turning heavy at times, but many places remaining dry throughout. It'll stay cloudy with outbreaks of rain in the north and northwest, drier with evening sunny spells and scattered showers elsewhere. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. A mere handful of seconds past 1 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed if you've just joined us. I'm Alistair Stewart, and for the next hour I'll be joined by good friends to discuss all manner of stuff. We'll be keeping you company here on TV and on radio, and as I say, we have plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion, what will happen if Ukraine actually wins the war. We'll have a voice live from Ukraine. We'll also be hearing what you think, and we'll be having more expert guests as well. We're going to also be looking at an intriguing twist, nothing to do with any of that, and that is the suggestion that there's yet more money to be made available for schools to help bring on those children who were held back and got stuck as a result of the coronavirus. We'll be talking to a head teacher about that, and also someone from the world of parent-teacher associations. So don't miss any of that. And as I say, finally, your thoughts at the very end of the programme too. Now, returning to our main theme of the day, what if Ukraine wins? I'm delighted now to be joined from Ukraine by Denis Ganza. Denis is a Ukrainian youth delegate to the United Nations and is a member of the Youth Advisory Council to President Zelensky. Denis, it's always a huge honour for us to be joined by folk from Ukraine. We can sit here in the comfort and safety of our studio and talk about it. You're there, you're living it. But everybody on the programme wants me to ask you one first question. Many of us in this country look at Zelensky and see him as a bit of a hero, an icon, an extraordinary man. What is he actually like to work with, sit opposite, advise and guide as someone who is in their early 20s? What's that actually like?
You know, I haven't personally met President Zelensky yet because our council was just established 10 days before the war, but we were planning to meet in the beginning of March. But what I'm hearing with the people I know who are working with him closely, Believe me, he's the most easy guy you may know. Even in those times when we have war, he's open to the journalists, open to cooperation. Of course, he follows the security measures, but he was an actor before, and he played. He's very open-minded. He knows the innovations, and what is really, he's genuine. And this is what buys people, why people trust him, because he never lies to you. He never follows, some secret interests. And this is, nothing compared before, like, to our former presidents who were mostly businessmen, people with, trying to get on the ground, having different meetings. No, President Zelensky is straight. He just say the things as they are. But what is most important, he's the patriot of his country, and he stays there, and he will be staying till the last shot.
He said last night that this conflict could only end through negotiation and diplomacy. And I had some terrific guests on the programme earlier from the top echelons here of our political establishment, our diplomatic establishment. They absolutely agreed with that, but they were all of them slightly concerned that he also said, and not an inch of Ukrainian territory will be conceded. We'll negotiate a peace, but we want it all back. I have to put it to you bluntly, Denis, is that a realistic ambition?
I do think yes, of course, because, we're at war for many, many years, and we do hope, believe me, all the Ukrainians which are fighting today for Ukrainian territory, if you come to them, to the front line, and you say them, guys, we're going back, we're not taking our territories back, believe me, they will go and take them by themselves. It's just that we do not want this war to get even more bloody. We do not want, innocent people in Donetsk, in Crimea, in Luhansk to suffer. We do understand, and the only way we can solve this is with diplomacy, and we have been stating this for 8 years. President Zelensky has said this till the first days of war, that we don't want the guns to talk. We want the people, the diplomats to talk. But it's just impossible with Russia. So the only thing they do understand is power. That is why you see so many killed Russian troops. You see so many losses from the Russian side, because we do understand that the Russia, you can only speak with power, and we always urge Europe that the only way you can negotiate on something with Russia is by sending us the weapons we need to make sure that we win them in this war.
You said back in February something very similar to what President Zelensky himself also said, which I've already quoted on the programme, and that is, I'm now quoting you back to yourself, this is not just a war against Ukraine, this is a war on the whole of Western civilization. That's the civilization that your generation will inherit as the new generation of leaders. Do you still feel that that is what is at stake? Not just Ukraine, but the way we lead our lives in Western democracies?
Let's imagine a situation that Ukraine wins the war tomorrow. Of course, the world will change a lot. How do we accept security? How do we think about it? What is security? Because, Russians have proven that any moment they send a rocket, that there is no security in your country. For me, it's really personal, because just several days ago, my hometown of Lozova in Kharkiv region was totally the palace of culture was destroyed. Also, what is sustainability? Come on, we have been talking in the United Nations about the sustainability, the SDG goals for so many years, and in one day, it's gone. We must talk about, thinking sustainable, but acting responsible.
Yes.
We have no times for blah, 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 and, oh my God, we need to impose these. Sometimes you need just to react very, very fast to the things which are coming. And the war in Ukraine, and I'm really proud, of the West, which united really good in giving the very fast response. You have provided weapons, you have provided economical support, you have accepted our refugees. And what is more, we are now trying to solve the food crisis, which is here to come, because millions of tons of grains are staying in Ukrainian seaports. So let's think about how do we act responsible every day, not just, okay, we need to discuss this in 101 round table. There is no time for this.
Do you sense, you mentioned the United Nations, and one of my earlier guests was Mark Seddon, who used to work for a former General Secretary of the United Nations and was a journalist reporting on the comings and goings at the United Nations. Do you sense already that the United Nations, the European Union, even NATO have already begun to transform in a positive and pretty fundamental way as a result of what's unfolded in your country since late February. Is that already underway?
I do think yes, because, you know, they have been all there, the OSCE, the UN in Ukraine for 8 years, telling us, okay, guys, you need to impose these security measures, you need to do this, and it's all gone in one day. And of course, it's really important. What, you know, for instance, Red Cross. If you open the Red Cross budget, you see that the 50% of it goes to the salaries, to offices, whenever you donate to it. And at the same time, you see their top chief going to Russia to discuss how Ukrainian people will flee to Russia. This is not how the way we should accept this. We need to really think which are our new values. And I would really pause, I'm really stressing on this, responsibility comes first. And this is what our president has shown to you, that he was offered for several times, just leave Ukraine, you know, run some government from abroad. We will, you know, we will take you there, you will speak at conferences. But what he said at Munich Security Conference, that 3 days before war, that I had my breakfast in Kyiv and I will have my dinner in Kyiv also. Responsibility is the key which we should put in every new policy we discuss. Who takes the responsibility? Who brings Russia to responsibility? And not only Russia, all other world terrorists. This is really what is important right now.
Final question, Dennis, and it's personal, if you like. You've said, and I quote, "I've lived under bombardment, but I still live in hope." What is life like for Dennis right now when you're not sitting there on a Zoom conference chatting to someone like me? What's it really like out there?
You know, we are working for 3 months already, with no rest. We are fighting for our country. I'm not personally, you know, an army guy, but I know how to help those guys. It's just the life has changed in total. We are losing friends, we are losing our homes. You know, we do not know what will come tomorrow. I cannot plan for 2 days, for instance, like you. I cannot, you know, and I'm always sorry for that. I know that you have weekends, but whenever someone in Europe tells me, okay, Dennis, I have a weekend, I said, come on. On Monday, there is a chance that I will not respond to you. Let's work right now. So this is the case for us. We have lost the count of time. We don't know what was there before the 24th of February, but the only thing we know that we have hope. We feel probably the most united in our independence history. And of course, we are, you know, really praying for all of those defenders, for all of those people who were killed. It's hard, believe me. We have changed a lot. You know, they're terrorizing our minds. They're terrorizing what we hear. But we will fight back, and we will fight till the end.
A pleasure and an honour to talk to you, Dennis. Most importantly, you and your loved ones look after yourselves. We wish you well. But thank you for your inspired analysis of what's going on and what is really at stake. Really appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Denis Ganzo, Ukrainian youth delegate to the United Nations. For entirely different reasons, my good friend David Liddington's been sitting with me. We're going to talk about politics and polling and elections and stuff here in just a moment. I was watching you out of the corner of my eyes. You are a been-there-done-it guy. You were virtually hanging on his every word.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I just, you know, awestruck by the
21 years old
maturity and the sheer guts of people like Dennis. And I suppose, you know, war does things. I mean, my generation never had to live through this in the UK in the way that my grandparents' generation had to. I look at Dennis, but in a different way, I look at President Zelensky. They are people whom, before the war, whom we might have said, oh, they're nothing terribly special. They have risen to the occasion that this conflict has called forth qualities that were latent within them and really has forged them as leaders. And I agree completely with what Dennis said about this conflict being a challenge to our values, not just to Ukraine as a country, because what Putin has made clear is that he wants a world that is governed by might is right. The great powers do what they want to, and others become satellites or satrapies of the great powers. They forget democratic self-determination, and we cannot accept that if we concede that on Ukraine, it'll be Moldova next, then it'll be nibbling away at the Baltics and so on.
Extraordinary. Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed for that and listening to it and for analysing it. David Liddington there. Now, let's go back to other stuff here. Some of you may feel slightly, not grubby, that's the wrong word, but, oh God, here we go again. But it does matter. Next week, we'll see the publication of the Sue Gray report into those party allegations, and then there'll be a parliamentary inquiry by the Standards Committee. What either yielded the stuff of speculation... Both have yielded the stuff of speculation, but what isn't speculative is that the political atmosphere is shifting and focus is shifting very clearly to the economy and, yes, the run-up to the next general election. How likely is it that 2024 will share similarities with 1997? Is there a change about? So we thought we'd check in with the pollster's pollster, Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, and I've also asked David Liddington to sit in the studio, listen to what the great Sir John has to say, and respond to my questions as well. John, always great to see you. Thank you for finding time for us this afternoon. That 1997 bit, you will know, because you will have seen it as well, a big two-page spread in one of the broadsheets yesterday, suggesting that the next election could be 1997-ish, that people perhaps have had enough with one state of affairs and it's time for change. I'm not seeing strong evidence in the polling for that yet. Are you?
No, I think I would agree with you. What, of course, is true is that since basically just before December, the Conservative government has been behind Labour in the polls for the first time in this Parliament. And a lot of that has happened in the wake of A, the Owen Paterson affair, and B, the Partygate row. And to that extent, at least, there's an obvious comparison with the difficulties of John Major's government between 1992 and 1997, in that, broadly speaking, the issue of ethics, then it was sleaze, it was partly about allegations about cash for questions, MPs taking money for doing things. Well, there's a slight echo there in the Owen Paterson affair. It was also a lot to do with MPs having sexual relations with people other than their wives, which frankly these days probably wouldn't raise an eyebrow. But John Major had turned into an issue by talking about returning to family values. So there are some similarities in the reasons as to why the government is in trouble. But at the moment, at least, under 1992-97 Parliament, we had whole extended periods when the government standing in the polls was below 30%. Even in the worst of Partygate in the middle of January, the Conservative standing in the polls never dipped below 31%. And it's currently around 33, 34. They're about 5 or 6 points behind Labour, but by the standards of other governments in midterm, you would not necessarily regard that as being fatal. Yes, we are now facing an economic crisis. And we are getting some polling that suggests that Labour are at least neck and neck and maybe ahead of the Conservatives in perceptions of who could handle the economy best. And certainly one of the things that Labour had an advantage in 1997 is that it was seen to be ahead on the economy. However, the truth is that probably John Major's government was well and truly hold on the water on one day, very early in the administration. That is on Black Wednesday, when the pound was forced out of the exchange rate mechanism. Support for the government plummeted after that. It never recovered. And the truth is that no government in the post-war period has ever managed to survive what was in effect a sterling crisis and devaluation. Now, the government has difficulties with the cost of living crisis, but it's not faced the kind of problems with the pound that certainly undid John Major's government and also, frankly, undid Harold Wilson's government before 1970.
Question to you, John, and then I'm going to bring David in as well. But the final question to you is the other fundamental difference, it strikes me, between now and 1997 is, I take everything that you said about John Major's problems, but Starmer is no Blair. That's a fundamental difference. And all of the data that you know a million times better in every language available to humanity than I do, that none of that data yet that you've just analysed so succinctly suggests an overall Labour majority. It's a lot closer to what's just unfolded in Australia than what they did. And I hope you saw James Forsyth's brilliant piece in The Times saying the biggest problem for the party supported by the person I'm going to ask the next question to after you've answered is a hung parliament with Labour cutting deals with other people.
Well, you're certainly right that, John Major was brilliant at working a room or working the Commons tea room, but was not a very good public speaker. Whereas Tony Blair was brilliant. In contrast, now, of course, it's Boris Johnson who's the charismatic figure, though the question is he now a damaged charismatic figure? Because eventually Tony Blair became a damaged charismatic figure, whereas whatever are Sir Keir Starmer's attributes, it's not charisma. Now, that said, there is a way in which there is a similarity, and that is that basically the Conservatives don't have any friends in the current House of Commons. If we do get a hung parliament, therefore, it'll be very, very difficult for them to sustain a minority administration. And one of the things that's similar to 1997. Remember, Paddy Ashton, before 1997, made it very clear that the Liberal Democrats preferred Labour to the Conservatives, and indeed they actually came up with some joint policies on constitutional reform before the 1997 election. Sir Ed Davey, the now current Liberal Democrat leader, has done the same thing and has said, we are not interested in working with the Conservatives, we will only work with Labour. Now, of course, in the end, that collaboration between the Liberal Democrats and Labour before 1997 didn't come to much because Labour, much to their surprise, won an overwhelming majority. But if the Labour Party does find itself in a hung parliament this time, then yes, it will probably face itself with one or other of two potentially difficult choices. One is to do a deal with the Liberal Democrats. Now, the Liberal Democrats, having been sold a pup once by the Conservative coalition of 2010 with a referendum on AV, will this time want something on proportional representation proper. But of course, the other big difference from 1997 is the Scottish National Party now dominates Scotland's representation.
Absolutely.
And they are looking for a referendum, and that's the other issue that may arise in the wake of a hung parliament.
All right. Is that what worries you as well? I mean, the economy is a challenge. You'll sort out what you're going to try and do, windfall tax, the rest of it. But the reality is that you face the possibility of a minority Labour government cutting a deal with somebody else, just like you did in 2010.
Yes, I agree completely with the James Forsyth analysis and broadly speaking with what John Curtis has just said. And I agree with John that the analogy is not with 1997, when my party had been in office for 18 consecutive years. In my mind, it is like the 3 elections since the last war when a party had been in office for 13 years. And next time, the Tories will have been in office for 14 years. So 1964, narrow change in government. 1992, John Major wins quite narrowly, but against the odds. 2010, change of government, narrowly, hung parliament, coalition. And you get to 12, 13, 14 years, people start to ponder time for a change. It's not as determined a feeling as it was in 97 after 18 years.
But the other thing, and I'll bring John back in again, but the other thing that I profoundly believe in personally as well, and I'm implacably not partisan, I'm impartial on all these matters, is the mantra, it's the economy. If I was a party manager, I would be worried, as John just pointed out, about the impact in history, that if you guys can't even figure out what your answer to the cost of living crisis is, are you a tax cutter? Are you pro-windfall tax? If you were pro-windfall tax, what would you do with it? Time is ticking against you, David.
There's very little time left. Certainly anything that requires legislation, you're right up against the buffers now. But I think my party needs to do probably 3 things, particularly bearing in mind, as you've said, Labour doesn't have to win outright, it just has to deprive us of an overall majority, and the Conservative Party is fighting on 2 flanks, against Labour and against Lib Dems. And it means, first of all, it is what you said, it's grip, competence, demonstrable competence, particularly on the economy. I mean, I would be clearing everybody's diary in the Cabinet now, focus on a coherent, believable, deliverable plan for dealing with the cost of living, mitigating the effect of that, and including explaining why there are some things you've chosen not to do. At the moment, we just get briefing and counter-briefing, which is damaging the government every day that continues. So competence, but then also on levelling up, carbon net zero, brilliant, ambitious ideas, but where is the delivery plan to put those into effect? But also, be straight with people, no more silly rows about who called a meeting with Sue Gray, and a gesture of something to show the Tory party is still interested in being a broad church, because I'm meeting far too many people, if you like, centrist, more liberal, voted Remain, conservatives, lifelong conservatives, who are saying, I feel politically homeless now. That is very, very dangerous territory.
Final thought to you, John, and I nodded a little bit towards what happened in Australia, but two things I found absolutely profound reading some of the more thoughtful pieces about it, rather than just the headliney stuff, beyond the fact that Labour did not get an overall majority. The Liberals in Australia, who are more like David's Conservatives down there, they got hammered by something that was like the blue wall. It was seats that they thought they could take for granted, that Labour went in there and picked up. And the minority parties, the Greens, the smaller parties, did remarkably well. There's a lot of lessons in that for the UK political system, isn't there?
Well, it's certainly true if we go back to the local elections of a fortnight ago. Of course, the surprise of them was the way in which the Democrats, who have long been in the electoral dodos, managed to begin it seemingly to once again to be the party of protest for former Conservative voters. And there certainly is a warning to the Conservative Party there. But I think coming back to the earlier comments, of course, the interesting things about the current government is that Boris Johnson really did try to put clear blue water between himself and both Theresa May's administration and David Cameron's, in a way that there were tensions between John Major and Lady Thatcher, but in many respects, John Major's administration was regarded as a continuation. So the interesting thing is that although, yes, the Conservatives have been in power for a long time, you could argue that really this government started in July of 2019. The problem is, of course, that's very much a trick that focused on the personality of the current Prime Minister, and it is now the personality of the current Prime Minister that's become a central issue in our domestic politics.
John, it's always a pleasure. I have to stop it there. Apologies for that, but you're welcome, as you know. Any time that you can fit us in, we can always fit you in. And the same goes for you, David Liddington, both on Ukraine, but also on that very honest, calm and impartial analysis of where we are in the nitty-gritty of politics as well. A real pleasure to see you, and thank you both. We have a little over half an hour to go, but we've plenty more still to come here on Alistair Stewart and Friends. After the break, as I said, the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi's called for parents to make sure that their children's schools are offering the free tutoring scheme that was set up as part of the COVID catch-up plan. We'll be discussing what that really means with a head and also someone who helps run the vital Parent-Teacher Association movement. So stay with us, but first let's tell you what the weather's going to be like this afternoon.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy in the northwest with some rain, but drier and brighter elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. It will tend to be cloudier towards northern coasts in the southwest, where a little patchy rain is possible. In the southeast of England, there is very little cloud and plenty of prolonged warm sunny spells here. South Wales will be mostly cloudy in the west, with some patchy rain here. The best of the sunshine will be in the east. The northwest of England has another rather cloudy afternoon, although some bright or sunny spells will develop, along with a scattering of locally heavy showers. In the northeast, it's mostly cloudy this Sunday afternoon. The cloud thick enough at times for a light rain or drizzle in places. It's a similar story in southern Scotland, cloudy for most, with patchy rain in the northwest and some heavy showers, mainly in the east of the country. In contrast, Northern Ireland will have a mixed bag of sunny spells and scattered showers this afternoon. The showers turning heavy at times, but many places remaining dry throughout. It'll stay cloudy with outbreaks of rain in the north and northwest, drier with evening sunny spells and scattered showers elsewhere. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 1:28. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to get you up to date on GB News. Number 10 says the Prime Minister did not request a meeting with a senior civil servant, Sue Gray, and that he hasn't tried to influence the outcome of her investigation into Partygate in any way. Labour called on Boris Johnson to urgently explain what they'd discussed, with Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner saying people deserve to know the truth. The cost of living gap between rich and poor households has reached the highest since records began in 2006. The Resolution Foundation has found inflation for the poorest tenth has now hit 10.2%. That's compared with 8.7% for the richest. The think tank put this down to lower income families spending more on energy bills, which are rising sharply. 2 cabinet ministers have objected to imposing a windfall tax on oil and gas firms. Labour says the tax revenue can be used to ease the burden of rising household bills. But the Health Secretary and Northern Ireland Secretary say it won't work and that it could have long-term impact on businesses. Greg Marsh, who's the Chief Executive of Noose, a company which is helping families navigate the cost of living crisis, told GB News regulators could do more to stop rising energy prices.
We believe that the government will have to do more. We think that there will need to be intercession. One of the things they could do, for instance, is use the existing regulators, Ofcom and Ofgem, who regulates the communications industry and the energy industry, to put more pressure on the regulated providers of energy, the regulated providers of mobile phone services and broadband services, to ensure that those companies aren't increasing their prices above the rate of inflation, which is something many of them are doing.
The government could introduce a minimum staff requirement during rail strikes. It's as unions threaten major industrial action over pay. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps told the Sunday Telegraph ministers are considering making industrial action illegal unless a certain number of people are working. Political commentator Portia Berry-Kilby told GB News rail strikes aren't a sensible or compassionate move during a cost of living crisis.
By creating even more complications to people's commute to work, it might threaten other people's ability to earn money. It doesn't really seem the most sensible or even the most compassionate of decisions. Grant Shapps, by saying that there will not be kind of all power to the unions, is making a stand and saying that things have to change, and unions, all very well and good, can represent to some extent, but also can't kind of hold a gun to the government's head.
The Home Secretary will urge MPs to avoid mob rule and support the government's new public order bill tomorrow. Priti Patel will try to reintroduce measures which have been previously blocked by the House of Lords, which include up to 6 months in prison for obstructing a major transport network. Elsewhere, Ukraine has ruled out a ceasefire or concessions to Moscow as Russian forces intensify an offensive in the eastern region of Donbass. US President Joe Biden has signed a bill to provide £30 billion in military, economic and humanitarian aid to the country. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has cut off its gas supply to Finland after they refused Moscow's demands to pay in rubles. Ukraine's presidential advisor says Kyiv wouldn't accept any deal that involves giving up territory.
Any concession to the Russian Federation would instantly lead to an escalation of the war. So the war will not stop. It will just be put on pause for some time. After a while, with renewed intensity, the Russians will build up their weapons, manpower, and work on their mistakes. And they'll start a new offensive, even more bloody and large-scale.
Australia's Labour Party will form the country's new government from tomorrow, making a way for a greener way of living. Voters campaigning for climate change targeted seats held by Scott Morrison's Liberal Party, ending 9 years of a Conservative coalition. Local media reports Labour, which hasn't been in power since 2013, is just short of a majority of 76 seats, and they may need support of smaller independent parties. Well, here's what residents in Sydney had to say.
I actually think that it is time that we have a fresh government in place. The fact that the government hasn't made any steps forward on climate change, and they haven't been really active in that regard.
I thought that the Liberals were going to get in.
I think Morrison definitely needed to go, and it's good to see Albanese in. Yeah, lovely to see the independents. I think real change and a step forward for the environment.
The Education Secretary has said he's determined to make personal tutoring free for every pupil. According to the Sunday Express, Nadeem Zahawi said one-on-one teaching could become a part of the national curriculum, meaning schools will be able to identify gaps in learning and give kids the help they need. The aim is to help those who've fallen behind during the pandemic. And the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall are set to make a cameo in a TV soap. They'll guest star in a special episode of EastEnders to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Charles and Camilla will surprise residents of Albert Square at a street party to celebrate Her Majesty's 70 years on the throne. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Alistair.
Welcome back. You're watching Alistair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. It's just about 25 minutes to 2 and we're in our final half hour of the programme. Let's start off with some good news for all parents, at least I hope so. The targeted tutoring scheme rolled out as part of the post-coronavirus catch-up for school children is to be made available to all children. Now that comes as thousands of children across the United Kingdom are struggling to catch up since lockdown disrupted learning and forced schools to close their doors. The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, has said that he and the Prime Minister want all schools to embrace it, and they also want parents to push for it if they don't think that their children's school is doing enough. I'm delighted to be joined now by Kerry Packman, the Executive Director of Parentkind. Basically a kind of a central national voice almost for the Parent-Teacher Association movement. Is that about right, Kerry?
Yeah, we are the largest network of parent-teacher associations, and we also represent a parent voice in education at a local, regional and national level.
That you and PTO give this plan a hurrah, or do you have your suspicions?
I think generally Parentkind support that parents were so much part of the white paper. We've never seen that before within education, that parents were seen as a partner in education. I think the bit that concerns us just a touch around this is that through the 7 years that we've been doing research with parents, the biggest barriers for parents to get involved in their child's education is firstly around fear from their own experience of being in the education system. The second one is they don't know how. And the third one is that they've never been asked. and encouraging parents to go in and talk to their school, there needs to be a lot more information, a lot more guidance, and you need to break down those barriers in order for for parents to engage with their schools.
Last point particularly, as anyone who's kind enough to watch this programme knows very well, my daughter is in education and she's a former head as well, and she always bangs on about the importance of that. There are some mums and dads and guardians who will just do it as second nature, in there knocking on doors saying we need this, we want that and the other. And there are others who do care. I'm not rubbishing them or knocking them, but they don't feel encouraged to get involved. Nadeem Zahawi is really saying, come on, everybody on board.
I just can't see that happening unless they actually break down those barriers and give parents the information in order to go and ask the right questions. And it doesn't feel like though all of that information is quite out there at the moment. Parents have been telling us for a long time they want to be part of their child's education, but they don't know how. And the school side of it is around schools really consulting with parents as well. So, and we've seen schools improve that considerably over the COVID period, where they have really been working in partnership with their parents, and parents are understanding the curriculum more and what needs to be done. But around, I think we've got a poll out at the moment around the parent pledge and tuition. And I suspect a lot of parents, when we get the results in the coming weeks, won't actually know what this means. What does it mean? Go in, ask for the school. My child's going to get tutoring. How does that work? And in order for parents to go into the school and actually ask about, is my child going to get this? They won't do that unless they've got the information behind them.
Yeah. The final question is this, because I'm intrigued. You said right at the beginning of the conversation how much you welcomed that the need for parental involvement was recognised in the white paper for the first time, and that's a white paper is an intention to legislate. So Nadeem, clearly, it does mean it. It really does mean it. What he's saying. But the second point that you're saying is that it's not as often happens on these sorts of programmes. Let's knock the minister, let's knock the secretary. No, quite at all. What you're saying is, it's a wake-up call to heads and school leaders to say, we're here, we're ready to play our part, but please embrace us, please make us welcome.
Definitely. And part of what parents have been telling us for so many years is, can we have effective two-way communication? Let us know how we can be involved in the school, and we will more welcomely come in. And I think a point that you made earlier as well, that not all parents will come into the school environment, is that schools have to work into going out into the community as well, to look for those parents, work with faith leaders, work with community leaders as well, to get them to understand what part a school plays in a community and what kind of hub it can be, how that can support learning at home, and how parents can really form part of that school community.
Kerry Packman, absolutely music to my ears as a parent, and as I say, a very proud parent of one of them who happens to be a teacher, but generally speaking, it works at its best when it's a community spirit, and I always say hurrah to Mr. Sullivan, who ran Eggers School in Wootton, who really helped us when we were having a few issues, shall we say. They're gold dust great heads and headmistresses and leaders. Real joy talking to you, Kerry Packman. Thank you for breaking into your Sunday afternoon to spend time with us. That's Kerry Packman, the Executive Director of Parentkind. Welcome back anytime. Thank you. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends, old friends and now new friends as well. We've plenty more still to come in the final 15-20 minutes, including finalising our conversation on Ukraine, whether it can win the war and what that may mean for the rest of the world. Final top guests still to come. You really won't want to miss it. That's after this break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 1:45, and you're watching and listening to Alistair Stewart and Friends on GB News. The final say in my conversation about Ukraine goes to Sir Andrew Wood. Sir Andrew is an Associate Fellow of RUSI, the United Service Institute's Russia and Eurasia programme, and in many respects, more importantly, is the former British ambassador to Yugoslavia and subsequently to Russia. Andrew, very good of you to join us. Thank you very much indeed. I wanted to underline the significance of you having been our man running the embassy in Moscow, because a lot of folk will have seen lurid stuff in the papers about Putin's health, all in terrible trouble physically and mentally. How do you sense things would be in the Kremlin right now and at Putin's country retreat? How do they sense what's going on?
I'm a bit sceptical about the question of his health, because it's the sort of thing that we all almost encourage to believe that people like that in this sort of situation have a problem. He may or may not. I think he has a real problem is shock and horror at the skill and response that the Ukrainians have given to his lightning invasion, as he supposed it was. So it's a very different situation from what it was before. But he's also, in effect, a tyrant governing on his own. He doesn't have a circle around him who could give him balanced advice. He wants people who say, yes, you're quite right, we'll do that. And then he's surprised when he finds that doing that doesn't work.
How much worse do you fear that might be? And I take that very balanced view about lines being put out and mental health and the rest of it. But if Ukraine is perceived to have won, either, as Zelensky says, on the battlefield, or more likely in the corridors of diplomatic power, how much worse could it get? Will he lash out?
Yes, I think he will lash out. But he actually cannot win. Even if he managed to conquer the whole of Ukraine, he couldn't actually govern it reliably. And it would also have been a country which has been totally physically destroyed. So he hasn't got the power, including empowering money, to restore it and make sure it's governable. At the same time, in a sense, it's going to be very difficult, I think, for Zelensky to have won, because this is not something which is simply going to be decided by everybody signing a piece of paper and proceeding in a new fashion. I think it is something which psychologically and materially is going to be with us for a long time. I think Ukraine might win in the sense that the physical fighting comes to an end, or at least the prospect of finishing definitively for the foreseeable future. I wouldn't go much further than that.
Intriguing. As you may or may not know, I was talking to David Liddington, a man you know well as a former Europe minister, Christopher Mayer, a fellow former ambassador, earlier on in the programme. And I put it to them that what has already been achieved in terms of the world order, a wake-up call to the UN, a reinvigorated NATO, individual member countries spending more, doing more to defend Europe. There's a great deal that has already been achieved as a result of Russia's invasion and Ukraine's fight back. Do you sense that that's durable, or does it remain a work in progress?
I would say it remains a work in progress. The Italians have produced an idea of how to end everything, which I would regard as unjust, unrealistic, and quite inoperable. But there are people within Europe and wider who fear that feel that some sort of agreement is possible. It seems to me improbable that anything signed by President Putin will ever be reliable. He's never kept any of his other agreements, so I don't quite see why it would happen here. But he might have to agree to at least a space of peace or ceasefire of some sort for a durable sort of time, and that in doing that, he's not going to live forever. He may think that, in Russia, they may think that it's time for a more just administration and so on. So the future is not very clear for anybody. But what is clear is that the way the Russians have acted has, as you said, driven a much greater degree of unity within European nations and wider. Countries like Japan and Australia and so on have had their attitudes towards Russia and expectations about Russia changed.
Mm. Given all of that and a mixture, as it were, of unfinished business, Andrew, but also a recasting of some of the threats, and I know you have to be cautious, you're not a current diplomat, but you're a very senior former diplomat, is the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss right in saying that the next...
that compels me always to be cautious.
I respect that profoundly, I can tell you. But is she right to be saying the next thing that NATO really needs to do is not only shore up that Baltic territory, welcome Sweden and Finland into NATO ASAP, but significantly to up the arming of Moldova?
I'm less sure about the last bit. Moldova is quite a divided country. I don't know how much it's going to wish to be armed or how far it will be in a proper defensive posture before the Russians get anywhere near it. So I myself wouldn't have said that. But as an ambition, if it comes to the likelihood of Moldova being directly threatened, well, yes. But I think that's not on the table right now, and I hope it won't be.
Particularly expressed, Andrew, if I may say so.
I was evading your question, I suppose.
My final question is this, and again, I did put it to Christopher and David and other guests. One thing that strikes me, and it is me personally, Alistair Stewart speaking, is that it strikes me that all of these events since the end of February have in quite a significant way repositioned the United Kingdom within the world order. It's post-Brexit, whatever you want the scenario to be, but that has happened. And even in terms of the visuals, you've got Boris Johnson striding across the square in Kiev and being embraced by Zelensky, and yet you see Joe Biden overnight going to South Korea, talking about China and talking about North Korea. it's repositioned the UK and it's repositioned Johnson.
Yes, it has, and I have to say I'm very proud of the way that the UK has acted. It's faced reality, and it's done the best that it could, and it's also had a marked influence within the EU as well as beyond it, and I think also in the United States as well. I think he's been clear and very honest, which is a word that is not always applied to him, but he has been very honest and outspoken about what needs to be done. So I feel good about being British at the moment.
So, Andrew, it's always a pleasure. I'm really grateful. Thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to be the last to go, as it were. But that's exactly why I wanted you to do that, and you've just demonstrated brilliantly why you can bring it all together for us. Thank you very much indeed. That's Andrew Wood of RUSI, but also, as I underline it again, former UK ambassador to Russia and to Yugoslavia. We asked for your comments on Ukraine, we asked for your comments on education and whatever else you wanted to talk about, and you've been busy bunnies as always, for which I'm very grateful. Joe says, when exactly does the EU intend to cut its oil contracts with Russia? Why has it agreed to Russian demands to pay in rubles? Finland stands firm and refuses despite Russia cutting off supplies. Pete says, nobody wins at war. We wanted to include that one because it's just 4 simple words, but I think it is also something that all of my guests would agree with. Nobody's glorifying it, Pete. We're just trying to reflect upon it. Anthony says there must be a settlement to bring this conflict and the vast humanitarian and economic cost to an end. Instead of fueling the war by pouring in more weaponry and funding the West, the West should use all efforts to broker a peace agreement. Otherwise, there is likely to be a ruinous war of attrition lasting for years, with the ever-present risk of nuclear escalation in the background. A settlement inevitably means both sides have to make concessions, however unpalatable that may be. I think that's what Zelensky is talking about right now, but in the sense of escalation, Anthony, I hope that you would agree that Andrew Wood just spoke very eloquently to those concerns that you have. Now, we're Mark. Yes, Mark. Not sure that anyone will win the war. Many parts of Ukraine are devastated. Thousands of deaths already. Injuries and homelessness, and without the weapons from the West, they would have been destroyed completely. Russia is now out in the cold, with only the likes of China holding them up, but for how long? People in the West are seeing price increases like never before, with countries like the UK politicians wasting money by the billion, with no real leadership or direction, leaving its citizens heading toward a winter unable to afford heating and food. So I ask again, who actually wins in a war? Mark, thank you very much indeed. John says Putin knows that NATO would smash any attempt to expand across Europe. Better soldiers and equipment, better technology and more prepared for him, excluding nuclear weapons. I hope you're right on that final point, John. And Bonnie says if the war lasts a decade, which I doubt very much, Ukraine will have taken from us everything that we have. There will be no more money to give them. However, Boris Johnson borrowing money to give Ukrainian billions is the norm. We should withdraw from this war. Our country is hurting. Bonnie, we included that because it's a minority view and we respect minority views as well. The overriding sense from people who've spent time talking to us is to celebrate the support that this country has offered to Ukraine, an innocent independent country under threat from a dictator. And I'm not going to try and improve on the way Andrew Wood described it there at the very end. Have we got a minute or so left? I wanted to try. I can't find. You had so many on the education thing. I promise. Here's what I'll do. I'll have a head teacher on next week, and then we'll revert to that discussion about the relationship between schools and parents, because it was just getting lively, and you did send in some really great emails. So I'll come back to that, I promise. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon. Thank you so much for being with me. I'll see you again next weekend. Till then, a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy in the northwest with some rain, but drier and brighter elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. It will tend to be cloudier towards northern coasts in the southwest, where a little patchy rain is possible. In the southeast of England, there is very little cloud and plenty of prolonged warm sunny spells here. South Wales will be mostly cloudy in the west, with some patchy rain here. The best of the sunshine will be in the east. The northwest of England has another rather rather cloudy afternoon, although some bright or sunny spells will develop, along with a scattering of locally heavy showers.